What's up everyone, my name's Robbie, this is Robbie Mila, and today we're talking about Fidelity Zero Funds. Now, you might be a little skeptical. I know I was when I first heard about these things. Why would Fidelity, that can charge a fee and still have demand for their funds, have a fund that has absolutely zero expense ratio? Zero, it makes no sense, right? It's a very weird thing, especially because if you looked at their Fidelity 500 fund, which charges only a 0.015% expense ratio, that fund competes directly with the Fidelity Zero Fund, FNILX, which charges no expense ratio. So their free fund is competing directly with the fund that does have an expense ratio. It's honestly, it's crazy. But at the end of the day, you have to also think about the fact that 0.015% expense is really not a lot of money. In fact, if you had $100,000, it would only cost you $15 a year to have money in that Fidelity 500 fund. Now, if you have the Zero Fund, of course, you don't pay anything, so that's better. So the question is it really better to have your money in the Fidelity Zero Fund, or is there a catch? That's what we're going to figure out in this video. All right, let's get into this thing, and I want to ask you, please leave a little comment below. Let me know, let us know, all of the viewers watching, are you investing in one of these Fidelity Zero funds, and if so, which one? All right, so first up on our list today are the issues with the Fidelity Zero funds. Are these huge issues? No, they're not. Are they deal breakers? Probably not, but it's going to depend on you. So the first thing I have for you, the first kind of issue that we have, is the fact that you need to have a Fidelity account to invest in a Fidelity Zero Fund. You can't go to Schwab, you can't go to Vanguard, you can't go to Robinhood to get one of these things. You have to buy these with Fidelity. All right, so maybe a little bit of an issue for you, maybe not. You can easily get over that one, but this next one might be important for you. If you're retired, if you're getting ready to retire, if you're in the FIRE movement, financial independence, retire early, and you care about dividends and income that come off of a fund, this might be a problem for you. So the distributions on these Fidelity Zero funds are going to be annual distributions. They're going to be in December, and that could be a huge deal breaker for you if you really rely on income. If you want quarterly income or maybe even monthly income, this isn't going to work out. So if that's you, these might not be the funds to go with. You might want to go with a fund that at least pays quarterly, but think about that because it could be a problem for some people. All right, so those are the only two potential problems with the Fidelity Zero funds. The next thing we're going to talk about are the performances of the different Fidelity Zero funds, and we're going to put them up against their counterparts with Fidelity. So the first fund we're going over today is FNILX. This is the Fidelity Zero Large Cap Index Fund. This is the one I was talking about before, which is going up against the Fidelity 500 Index Fund. It directly competes with another Fidelity fund that is supposedly tracking somewhat the S&P 500 index. So what do we have here? Are they close? Are they performing correctly? Let's take a look. The big thing here, of course, is the net expense ratio. And as we can see, it's 0% for the Fidelity Zero and 0.015%, like we talked about, for the S&P 500 or the Fidelity 500 index fund. All right, so that's what we were thinking. Let's take a look at the yield real quick. The yield here is 1.04%, and the yield here for FXAIX is 1.30. Why is there a difference in the yield? Potentially, it could be just a time-weighted type thing. The fact that, this only pays once a year, and I believe this pays semi-annually. Actually, sorry, quarterly. So that's going to be potentially a reason. I'm not 100% sure on that one. Let's take a look at the returns. So here we have the returns of FNILX, FXAIX. The 2021 year-to-date return of FNILX trailed FXAIX by almost a percentage point so far right now in the year. But let's go back to the 1 year. So let's say 365 days. What did this do? Well, it's much closer. It's almost within, let's say, 25 basis points or 0.25%, these two. And if you go back to the 3 year, actually, FNILX is beating FXAIX. So what does this tell us? Well, it says that, to me, different time periods are giving different results, and you can't essentially say one of these is better than the other. So in my opinion so far, I would say that go with the cheaper one, right? But to just show you how similar they are, let's take a look real quick at the assets under management, or the holdings. And as you see, if we look at the top 10 right here, FNILX and FXAIX have very, very similar holdings. Apple 6.01, 6.21, Microsoft 5.71, 5.93, Amazon. They're all the same exact top 10 holdings, as you can see, and the percentages are very close. So okay, if I'm going to decide which one of these I'm going to go with, I'm personally just going to go with FNILX unless I want to have some type of distribution that's paid to me on a quarterly basis instead of annually. Okay, let's take a look at another one. Let's look at FZILX, the Fidelity Zero International Index Fund, versus FTIHX, the Fidelity Total International Index Fund. Are they similar? Well, yeah, the category is foreign large blend for both of them. The standard index is the MSCI EAFENR USD. I don't know what that index is, but they're both tracking the same one. So they're supposed to be pretty much the same exact fund. The total assets on this one are much closer, 3 billion to 8.3 billion. And actually, this is a bit better because the international fund, FTIHX, is actually a 0.06% expense, where, of course, Fidelity Zero is zero expense. So you're actually doing better on this one from an expense standpoint. The distribution yield here is 1.55 for FZILX at Fidelity Zero. FTIHX is actually a bit lower of a distribution on this one. Don't know why again, but they're extremely close. So probably we're just going to say it's like splitting hairs on this. So we have the 2021 year-to-date performance of the Zero Fund is trailing a bit from FTIHX. The 1 year is trailing 23.97 to 24.21. The 3 year is actually better for the International Zero Fund than FTIHX. So far, we have two funds that have had better short term on the non-zero part, but on the 3 year return, the zero was better. Again, let's take a quick look and see what's going on with the holdings in this. Are they similar? We have assets in the top 10%. Fidelity, Taiwan Semiconductor. This one's different. This one's Taiwan Semiconductor here. Nestle. This is holding the actual index. Tencent Holdings, Nestle here. So this is a bit different. So this actually is not exactly 100% similar to the top 10 holdings like we saw in the last one. So let's take a look at FZIPX versus FSMAX. So FZIPX is the Fidelity Zero Extended Market Index Fund. FSMAX is the Fidelity Extended Market Index Fund. Very similar names here. The standard index is the Russell 2000. This is called a mid-cap blend. And so what's going on in this thing? Let's take a look at the expense ratios. So the net expense ratio for the Zero Fund, of course, is 0, shocker. And the FSMAX is 0.035%. So this one's a bit better than the one I mentioned at the start of the video, which was 0.01%. So the Zero Fund has more of an advantage by going with 0 over this one. The distribution yield is actually higher on the Fidelity Zero, and let's take a look at the performance so far. Here we have the 2021 year to date, the FZIPX Fidelity Zero 16.67 and FSMAX 11.62. I don't know why it's so huge. I don't know what's going on here, but Fidelity Zero has a much higher return this year than FSMAX. For the 1 year, 47% versus 42.22. For the 3 year, 12.36 versus 15.61. These things are actually now inverted from what we saw before. The 3 year before was better, and the 1 year for the non-zero was better. This is actually inverted. So, okay, last one of the 4 Fidelity Zero Index funds. This one, we're going over FZROX versus FSKAX. So FZROX, the Fidelity Zero Total Market Index Fund. This thing invests in the broad stock market, many different stocks. The FSKAX does the same thing. It's a total market index fund. Let's take a look at the expenses. So the Fidelity Zero is 0%, FSKAX is 0.015, so this is more similar to the S&P 500 Fidelity Index Fund that we talked about at the start of the video. Let's go down and see the distributions. The yield on the distribution for the Fidelity Zero, 1.10%, for FSKAX, 1.18, a little bit higher on the FSKAX. Let's take a look at the returns. FZROX, the Fidelity Zero Fund, outperforming on the year-to-date return versus FSKAX. The 1-year return is lower and underperforming for the Fidelity Zero versus FSKAX by a very small amount. The 3-year is better by just 0.02% or 2 basis points, which is almost nothing, but the Fidelity Zero Fund does edge out FSKAX here on the 3-year return, which is the furthest back we can go because these Fidelity Zero Funds are pretty young. Okay, summary on this thing. If you had a Fidelity Zero Fund versus the other Fidelity Fund that charges an expense ratio, what we saw is that you can't really tell which one's going to be better from a return standpoint. The Fidelity Zero doesn't always underperform the counterpart, and sometimes it does. And there's no way to tell. There's no consistency. There's no correlation from what I've seen. So what does that mean? It means that you probably shouldn't decide this based on the return of the year-to-date return, the 1-year return, or the 3-year return. You have to decide it on something else. And what's that thing? Well, there are 2 things. The first thing is you can go by the expense. So you get the cheaper one, of course. So that's one way to do it. Or the other one is if you want distributions semi-annually or quarterly or whatnot, then you could go with the Fidelity counterpart, not the Fidelity Zero, if you want more opt-in distributions. Again, the Fidelity Zero is an annual distribution. So those are the 2 factors I would decide this on. That's how I would figure out what to invest in on this one. So leave a comment. Let me know if you're investing in one of these Fidelity Zero funds. And if you are, let me know which one. I'd love to hear from you. And you know what? If you like this video, please hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see future content like this. And by the way, there's another video that's coming up. It's on the end screen. You should probably click it right now.